Hey fellow garden gnomes, this is Brittany. Welcome back to my channel. So I'm really excited to finally get around to shooting this video. I've sort of had it in my mind that I would do it for a while and I just never got to it. And that is the video on things that I'm going to be improving on this year. You might remember I did a video like that last year. So I have a list here. First off is digging mushroom compost, which I actually did in the fall. I ordered a whole bunch of mushroom compost and put it into the main front garden. And then we also had a bunch of leftovers, so I put it in some areas where I put some berry bushes, and then I also put some on one of my back gardens. Next I have a double dig area for root veggies, and this I'm gonna try. I'm not sure how it's gonna turn out, but my issues in the past with root vegetables have largely been to do with the fact that they haven't been able to expand, I think, and for that you need very loose soil, so lots of organic matter. And so one of the ways different people deal with that is they double dig. Instead of simply digging enough to put the seed down, you actually dig below that and then return the dirt that you dug out into that hole and then plant the seed, so that the soil below where you plant the seeds is nice and loose, so that when the root grows down it will be able to expand into the loosened soil. I don't really have to do that with my potatoes though, because I'm only going to be doing container potatoes this year. I don't like to have to dig for potatoes. The fact that it's hard on the back, the fact that you often don't find all the potatoes, and the fact that you often end up spearing the potatoes with your shovel by accident. I find it a lot easier to just do it in containers, and then I can upend the container on a tarp and just sort through the dirt and find the potatoes and not harm them on the way. Put trellises lower to the ground. I did that, and that was just because last year I found that my beans and my squash and cucumbers, they don't send out tendrils until they are touching something. That's what I found last year. So what I'd end up with is these sort of plants that just weren't really climbing the trellis, and I think it was because the trellis was sometimes about this high off the ground. I'm going to plant my beets deeper, plant the seed deeper, because I found that last year the beets, especially the type that I use, which are cylindrical beets, they're longer, they were just kind of popping out of the ground and flopping sideways. It was sort of weird. It ended up that the beets just weren't really able to grow too well because they were more up out of the soil than they were in the soil. Double the amount of potato containers, which again I did. So last year I had 3, this year I have 6, and I don't think I have quite enough seed potatoes for all 6, so I think I'm going to devote 1 or 2 of the containers to my sweet potatoes, which some of them are also going to go into the ground. I don't have the same problem I find with sweet potatoes as with potatoes, because when you're digging up the plant, you're much more likely, I think, to find all the sweet potatoes attached to the roots, whereas with potatoes, they tend to detach really easily. So if you pull up the plant, you can potentially be leaving a ton of potatoes in the ground. And I have, again with potatoes, I have plant pieces of potatoes with 2 to 3 sprouts. So when you have a seed potato, you can sometimes have 2-3 sprouts that are coming up on it, and I used to cut them so that I would have pieces with 1 sprout each. A lot of literature out there and stuff will recommend actually having 2 sprouts on each piece of potato, and so I'm definitely going to try that. I also have fertilized my potatoes early on, so I have come to realize that potatoes are heavy feeders, so they need a lot of nutrients throughout their growth. So next I have start peppers mid-February and prune. So I did that. I started peppers mid-February along with my onions, and as they grew I pruned them a little bit so that they would basically grow back a lot bushier instead of just growing straight up, and thus become a bit of a stronger plant. And right now my plants are sitting out on my deck and my peppers look really good, so I'm super excited to put them in the ground. Next I have start tomatoes, zucchini, and achocha mid-March. The tomatoes and achocha were a little later. I didn't quite get them mid-March. I think it was more like the start of April. I did realize that with the achocha that was too early. I mean, I wanted to try it early because when I started them around the same time that I started my cucumbers last year, they didn't end up giving me any actual achocha until about September, and I had done some reading and found out that it was actually quite a long growing plant, so it needed like 120 days to reach maturity. But I definitely started it a little too early because it just really outgrew the pot that it was in really quickly. So I'm thinking that next year I might plant the achocha towards the end of April. But tomatoes were really good. I mean, maybe next year I'll try for mid-March again, but really I don't have any complaints. I've transplanted them a couple times into bigger pots, and they're nice and big, nice and healthy, way bigger than the tomatoes that I transplanted last year. And so I'm excited again to put those in the ground because I honestly wouldn't be surprised if they started producing in a month. So the zucchini, I didn't end up planting around that time. I ended up planting that a little later, towards the end of April. But it seems okay. It looks good and healthy, so hopefully it'll start producing some female plants earlier on, because I remember last year I was really frustrated because I didn't get any female flowers until probably the fall, and so then the zucchini never really had time to actually grow before the frost came and killed it off. So that's why I wanted to start it earlier. And then I have start corn inside, plant, then seed peas at base. So when I say plant peas at the base, what I'm actually referring to is something called the Three Sisters, which is a method of gardening that has come about as a result of Native American practices, something that they've done for quite a while, which is they would grow corn, they would grow peas up the corn, so the corn would act as a trellis for the peas. The peas would also provide stabilization for the corn, so the peas winding out all around the corn would kind of help hold it in place and anchor it in the event of adverse weather, such as high winds or hail. The third sister is squash, and squash would crawl around the base of the corn and the peas, and it would do a couple things. It would keep weeds down because it would shade the ground from the sun, meaning weeds couldn't really grow. It also, of course, produces squash, which is great. But it also reduces evaporation, so when the ground is wet, you're going to have less surface evaporation when there is, again, these huge squash leaves shading the ground from the sun. And recently something that I heard that was also a benefit was apparently critters really don't like walking amongst the squash leaves because they are kind of prickly. But yeah, apparently it's a really good deterrent for raccoons, deer, other smaller animals that might want to come and nibble on the corn. And the last little note I had made about what I wanted to improve on was making cages for my tomatoes, because I have used cages that you can find at the hardware store, and they're very flimsy and they're not nearly tall enough. I mean, when you get them, sure, they seem like, 3-4 feet tall, but once you stick them into the ground and you stick them deep enough that they'll be nice and sturdy, that can take 8 to 10 inches at least off of the height. So now you're left with maybe a 3-foot high tomato cage, which isn't really good, especially if you're doing indeterminate tomatoes. Maybe if you have determinate tomatoes, fine. Indeterminate tomatoes get huge and then they flop over because they're unsupported, and often because of their weight, they then crush the tomato cages. You can probably tell I'm speaking from experience. And so they're incredibly frustrating to work with, so I've abandoned the use of those tomato cages and mostly use them for my peppers. And so now I am making my own heavy-duty tomato cages. And I'm doing it with actually the same fencing that I used for my trellises, which is a sheep and goat fencing that I was able to get at a hardware store. And I'm basically just taking it and folding it into a sphere. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a stake, drive it into the ground next to where I want to put the tomatoes, and then using like a zip tie or something similar to attach this heavy duty trellis to that stake, and then put the tomato there and have that grow up there. And I did a lot of research on how to build a heavy duty trellis for tomatoes. I mean tomato cage, but trellis tomato cage, I guess it fulfills the same function. So I hope you enjoyed this video talking about the various improvements that I will be making in my garden. If any of you have any suggestions about further improvements you think I should make, please leave them in the comments below. I'm happy to read them. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you are interested in seeing more updates on my garden as it goes through the 2017 season, please hit subscribe. And I also want to announce that in addition to Instagram, I also have a Snapchat, and so if any of you guys want to add me, I will definitely be doing some little gardening snaps where I do like a quick little tip. I've already done some stuff like that. My username is Britt, B-R-I-T-T _Dane, D-A-I-N-E. And if you haven't followed me on Instagram yet, I highly encourage it. There's certain things that are a bit too small to put in a video, such as small harvests, that kind of thing. So in that case, I will take a picture and put it on my Instagram. If you want to keep track on what I'm getting from my garden, it would probably be a good idea to follow me on Instagram. So I hope that wherever you are, your garden is growing. And until the next video, stay wildly green.